Welcome. Today's subject is going to be about how civilizations rise and how they fall. Now, you might be thinking this has been done to death. In my opinion, it hasn't been done adequately at all. Most folks on the right, in my experience, don't really understand how civilizations form in the first place. They don't understand how organic communities come into existence. And they don't really have a sound understanding of what causes civilizational collapse or what it looks like. That's going to be the topic for today. Let's see. Some people will have a sort of mystical understanding about this. They'll look to perennial traditionalism and they'll think that there's sort of femininity to civilizational collapse. Some will take a more sort of empirical view and they'll think that civilizational collapse is just caused by individualism. And you know, they're both kind of right. There's elements of truth to both of these, but we're really going to unpack this. So let's get into it. Cue the unironically epic intro.
Rome is civilization! Rome is order! Rome is power! And out here, we are Rome!
Okay, so to introduce things, basically civilizations do have a life cycle. They do actually behave like organisms. You can see this on a more micro scale, perhaps, you know, arguably with the family, but certainly you see this with empires or even nations, really. The decline, as we'll see, there's a lot of truth to the meme that you've probably seen where it's, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times, and it goes around in a circle. There's a lot of truth to that, and this is why you tend to get this kind of feminine, masculine dialectic that people describe when they're talking about civilization's rise and its collapse. And most importantly, there's good news because we can stop civilizational death. Yes, the religious motive in a society that can keep alive those virtues and those practices and that struggle, so that a civilization doesn't just wither and die, it goes through a kind of winter. And then there's a spring at the end of that. And again, this is something that is given to us, yes, okay, by traditions around the world. They just come to intuit and understand this over time. So you have this ancient wisdom, but there's also empirical data which shows this very explicitly. And almost nobody knows about this. But anyway, that's why I'm making this video. So let's get into it. Yeah, the life cycle of civilizations. Here we go. Yeah, hard times create strong men. That kind of thing. Well, why is that? Well, there are two great books that talk about civilizations and their life cycles. First one I'm going to show you. Okay, so this is probably the better known one, if either of these are well known. This is by Sir John Glubb. You'll see it's called The Fate of Empires. And there's another one as well with the same title. Independently, this guy, Dr. Arthur John Hubbard, arrived at the same title. You see, both of these books are very slim. They're practically essays, and I recommend both of them. Both of these guys were British, and they were looking at the collapse of the British Empire, and so they studied empires in the past with all the historic data that they had worldwide, and they looked at what causes their rise, what causes their collapse, do they have a life cycle. And Sir John Glubb there, he arrived at this conclusion that civilizations typically, or empires typically, have this 250-year life cycle. And as I'll explain in a moment, that's been empirically proven. That's scientific data now. And so why do empires rise, according to these two guys? Well, when you have a city that forms, and you have a sort of regional power, it expands and it becomes an empire. You have basically a nomadic aristocracy, and they sort of form, rather than just annihilating a peasant class, they kind of come together and they form an organic group, which literally behaves like an organism. And so this expands into an empire. But once all the enemies are defeated, those masculine virtues, you know, the martial virtues, honor, all of that stuff, it becomes less important. Once you've expanded out and you've got a region within which trade, peaceful trade can happen, the fight turns from focusing outside to the enemies, and it starts to turn to internal competition. And so every dynasty that has its little fiefdom, or it has its capital, basically, turns on each other. And so what competition are you left with? You're left with the feminine infighting in the group. That's the only competition that remains. And so this is why, in a sense, we can talk about these civilizations being a victim of their own success, as those empires which have become so comfortable that you don't need warriors and you don't need honor bands of men, having each other's backs and stuff like that, and instead you just, it's just status seeking. These are female ethics. This we'll explain in a minute. And during those periods, of course, you see an increase in individualism. At most, caring about your immediate family, if that. Rejection of the more sort of public gods and religious ideas, and maybe, just a concern for the household gods, if anything. And women will select for men based on their economic status, based on money. And, children will be brought up to be sort of, weak and lazy and, too comfortable. And they will be encouraged to, not be more religious, not be more philosophical, not be a warrior or something like that from those classes. No, they'll be put into the bourgeois sort of merchant class, and so they'll, maybe expected to be a doctor or engineer, but certainly something that makes money, effectively. And who will be the idols of these times? Well, there'll be an utter rejection of the warrior class, the noble, kings, of before. That will be seen as being, barbaric and immoral and from, an archaic time. And instead, now we focus more on the artists, the singers, the actors, the poets. There's nothing new about any of this, and that's what these two essays by these gentlemen show. It's very interesting. And as I've explained, there's a Russian-American scientist called Peter Turchin, and he's developed something really amazing called cliodynamics. And basically, using computer models, he's able to just give the computer some data about how and where an empire starts out. I mean, this is able to predict that civilization's growth and its life cycle, like an organism, because it is. And it's able to see its decline. And what's really, really interesting about this is that it's not completely deterministic. I am not a materialist. I'm a Catholic, as you know. And this takes account of human agency, human free will. It's really an incredible system that Peter Turchin has developed. And very importantly, it proves Sir John Glubb right about that 250-year life cycle, and it is a huge, what can I say, piece of evidence for corporatism to say that nations and human societies, organic ones, do behave like organisms, and so we have to take account of that. We've got to think about that when we think about how civilization should be structured. That's a topic for another time. Okay, so this whole masculine versus feminine thing, this is something very ancient, and a lot of my audience, you're probably going to be materialist. The way you think about everything is in terms of, well, what does the science say, what's empirically valid. But we can't dismiss this ancient knowledge. It adapted, and it is there for a reason. And when a civilization expands to its limit, the only competition that's left is an economic one. And that word economy, it comes from the ancient Greek word for the household and the keeping of the household. Well, the only ethics that are left are this internal status competition, which is a, evolutionarily speaking, a feminine activity in the group. And so this is why, for instance, you'll have traditionalists, perennial traditionalists especially, talking about the return of the solar king. And when they're talking about what they mean is that there's probably going to be some kind of civilizational collapse, the hard times, and the hard times will create strong men. And you will see, even before the civilization collapses, you might see a Julius Caesar figure, or an Augustus. You'll see some kind of emperor emerge to try and restore order and restore those values, those martial values, which had originally made the empire so great. You'll see someone, the solar king, emerge to make America great again, or whatever. And that's a thing. And we see that's what happens. That's what happens historically. And this is just to say, basically, that corporatism is not just something that is mystical and it's something that eccentric aristocrats might think, or it's something quaint and charming from Plato or Hinduism, the caste system and things like that. We have the data, we're able to see this is how human groups behave. We should take it seriously. Now, what about the individualism versus corporatism aspects to this as well? Well, that's very interesting. We have to consider this because this is totally related to the masculine versus feminine thing. Why is that? Okay. Now, bear with me. The youth, teenagers, tend to be more individualistic. They're trying to break away from the group a bit to try and establish themselves as some kind of player. Now, this is really important for human nature. This is human nature to a large extent. You'll have some human group here. You'll have some new upstart say this town isn't big enough for the both of us, and he'll break off and he'll go and do his own thing and start a new group somewhere else. He'll probably be quite innovative, because that comes with youth as well, and he will adapt to a new environment, a new place, and then a culture will begin to cement. I mean, a whole new, system will evolve, or develop over there. And then later, you'll have a breakaway from that and a breakaway from that. This is what makes humans so very adaptable. And so because the feminine is considered to be more in touch with the youthful side of things, and the feminine is considered to be more the nurturing mother, and the voice gets higher and you are more in tune with the young, to nurture the youth. The feminine is considered to be more on the individualistic, more on the youthful side of things. perhaps even on the rebellious side of things, that teenage rebellion thing, that might have something to do with it as well. But, enough about the comparison there. Um, what did the data say? This is all sounding, very mystical and religious. Well, look at what the data say. So, in terms of the political spectrum, where you have on the left the more individualistic liberal side of things, Jonathan Haidt, who's probably one of the more important sociologists of our day, he established 5 moral values depending on where you are on the political spectrum. The further left you go towards the more liberal, individualistic side of things, the more you're pretty much only concerned with individual moral values, like harm avoidance and not being cheated by others. You're not really concerned with, you know, the authoritative hierarchy and, all these masculine virtues of who's the alpha male within our group, who is in our group at all, sort of group values, and then, uh, purity or sanctity, who's upholding our shared definitions that we get from our stories and from our religion, our metaphysical values, so that we have a shared definition of justice. So that's a more kind of group fairness, group justice idea. On the right, where you have people much more concerned with, what is a sustainable, long-standing community, you find that people are concerned with all of those values. So it's a much more holistic, much more corporatist picture that we see on the right. If you look, I've just added a little note there in the brackets at the bottom. Interestingly, Jonathan Haidt, in retrospect, made some room for people who are libertarians, who, okay, yes, do tend to be a little bit more on the autistic spectrum, but basically they're extreme individualists. So it's really off the scale in terms of you leave me alone altogether. I don't want to have anything to do with the group unless it's entirely on my own terms. And it's a completely private thing. Now, look at this. We find exactly the same thing in another study, which shows that the individualizing tendency tends to decline right off as we go to what's typically considered to be right-wing, whereas the binding, the group values, that is considered to be very high on the right. As we get more to the left wing, we find greater individualism. Now look, something I want to make very clear is I'm of course not attacking the feminine. I'm of course not attacking individualism per se. Innovation, the individual, the feminine, the maternal, youthfulness, all of those things, all of that is a part of society. And it has to be embraced. It has to be taken as part of the whole. That's what corporatism is all about. It's about harnessing those energies, that individualism, that the feminine sort of status-seeking, internal economic thing. It's about recognizing those things, taking account of them, and harmonizing everything, bringing it all together. The problem with liberalism, the problem with the West today, is that we have a hyper-individualism. It sort of wants to just totally break away. It wants to break everything apart, break the whole thing down and atomize everything. And as we've seen, on the left, even if we're talking about communism and Bolshevism, Marxism, all that kind of stuff, socialism, they might say that they're talking about the group, but they don't really take account of differences within the group. They're not thinking about this as being a a real body politic, an organism with different organs, the eye being different from the hand and that kind of thing. No, I mean, they're still individualistic. They want everyone to be these equal little atoms within some big blob. That it's still individualistic. And that's why it's on the left. And really, the communitarian, the corporatist side of things, that is right wing. And it's about understanding how we can use our traditions and use science, use the scientific data to understand what a real organic society looks like and how it can be sustained. The way I want to conclude is that particularly in Dr. Hubbard's book, he puts a special focus on looking at how the religious motive can keep the civilization alive. Because, okay, yes, once the civilization's expanded, the enemies outside the walls, they may have been defeated, but the struggle inside against, one's fallen nature and the constant entropic decline of, that we find ourselves in, that tendency towards degeneracy, towards laziness, that constant drawing down of laziness and other sins, that's always there. And so the struggle is always there. And if you can bring the whole community together towards fighting that eternal battle, then those values and virtues that make civilizations great, they will always be with us. When there's a decline in the civilization, maybe because a new technology is introduced, or maybe because there's just more money going around, and whatever, then that will just be a winter. And then the spring will come again, and the solar king will rise again. And you see, that's why I'm a Catholic, because the resurrection of Christ, that that reminds us that our God is a God who doesn't die, doesn't stay dead, and so Christianity is a religion which is perennially always coming back. When you think it's about to go, when you think it's on its last legs, it comes back and it stays with us. Anyway, look, I hope you found this presentation interesting. I felt it was needed. Like I say, lots of folks on the right, they don't understand how civilizations form. They don't understand how they collapse. And I think we're in the midst of civilizational collapse in the West. I think that's pretty obvious. And so I think we really need to understand what's going on there. Listen, if you like this presentation, I want to make more, but I have a bunch of kids and I'm really busy with all kinds of different things. If you want to support me, there's the Buy Me a Coffee link down below somewhere. Or, buy one of my books. I have a children's book out, and hopefully soon the second one is going to come out, and more after that. And, if you know any liberals, or especially libertarian friends, I have a book to red pill them. Seemingly it is the ultimate red pill for libertarians. It's called The Uniqueness of Western Law, a Reactionary Manifesto. And it's got an afterword by Ricardo Duchenne, which is really cool. So, go and buy one of those books. Thanks very much. Leave some comments. I love to hear from people, love to talk about these things. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.